My name is Gary Ellis, and back in 2018, I decided to take my RV up to Glacier National Park in Montana. Being a freelance photographer had its perks. I could work anywhere, and I had a penchant for capturing untouched landscapes. I thought a solo trip would not only boost my portfolio, but also give me a much-needed break from city life. I'd been on the road for a few days, enjoying the serene beauty of the mountains and the crisp, clean air. The park was less crowded than usual, which was perfect for someone like me who enjoyed solitude. I set up camp near a quiet spot overlooking a glacier lake. The view was postcard perfect, and I couldn't help but chuckle at the thought that my friends were stuck in cubicles while I had this paradise all to myself. Guess the early bird really does get the worm, or in this case, the perfect shot, I mused to myself. After a day of hiking and snapping photos, I returned to my RV to find a note pinned to the door. It read, "Beautiful place, isn't it? Be careful out here." No signature, nothing else. I glanced around but saw no one. It struck me as odd, but I shrugged it off, thinking it was probably some local's way of being friendly, or maybe trying to spook the tourists. Either way, I wasn't going to let it ruin my mood. The next morning, I headed to a nearby trail recommended by a ranger I had chatted with earlier. "You'll find some rare wildlife if you're lucky," he'd said. As I trekked deeper into the forest, the trees seemed to close in around me. The sounds of birds and rustling leaves provided a soothing soundtrack, and I felt at ease. About an hour into the hike, I came across an old, weathered cabin. It wasn't on any map I had, and I hadn't heard anyone mention it. Curiosity got the better of me. I approached the cabin, noticing that the door was slightly ajar. Probably abandoned, I thought. Still, I knocked. No answer. I pushed the door gently, and it creaked open. Inside, the cabin was cluttered with various trinkets, old lanterns, fishing gear, and dusty furniture. On a table lay a collection of photographs. I picked one up and felt a chill run down my spine. It was a picture of me setting up my RV. Another showed me hiking earlier that day. "This can't be," I whispered, my mind racing. Someone had been watching me, documenting my every move. I heard footsteps outside. Panicking, I quickly placed the photo back and hid behind a large cabinet. The door swung open and a man walked in, humming an off-key tune. He was tall, with unkempt hair, wearing a worn-out flannel shirt. He carried a hunting knife on his belt and had a rifle slung over his shoulder. "Got some good shots today," he mumbled to himself, laying down a camera on the table. My camera. I instinctively felt for my backpack. It was gone. How had he taken it without me noticing? My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. He started flipping through the photos on the camera, chuckling. "You have a good eye," he said aloud, as if speaking to me directly. "Shame you'll be leaving so soon." I needed to get out of there. Slowly, I inched toward the back door, keeping my eyes on him. Just as I reached for the doorknob, it squeaked. He turned abruptly. "Who's there?" he demanded, his jovial demeanor vanishing. Thinking quickly, I said, "Just a lost hiker. Didn't mean to intrude." I stepped out from behind the cabinet, hands raised. He eyed me suspiciously. "Lost, huh? These woods aren't safe for people who don't know their way." I forced a laugh. "Tell me about it. I must have taken a wrong turn somewhere." He glanced at the camera and then back at me. "You take good pictures." "Thanks," I replied cautiously. "I actually came looking for wildlife to photograph." "Wildlife, you say?" He smirked. "Sometimes the most dangerous creatures aren't animals." I swallowed hard. "Well, I should probably get going before it gets dark." He blocked the doorway. "I'm afraid I can't let you do that." My mind raced for a way out. "Why is that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He tapped the knife on his belt. "You see, folks around here don't take kindly to trespassers." I needed to distract him. "I didn't see any no trespassing signs. Maybe I can make it up to you? I have some supplies back at my RV, food, even some good coffee." He seemed to consider this. "Coffee, huh? Been a while since I had a decent cup." "Absolutely," I said, seizing the opportunity. "Let's head over and I'll brew you the best cup you've had in years." He nodded slowly. "All right, but no funny business?" "Of course not," I assured him. We walked back toward my campsite. I tried to keep the conversation light. So, do you live out here all alone? He glanced at me. Been out here for years. The forest provides everything I need. Must be peaceful, I commented. He chuckled. You'd be surprised. We arrived at my RV and I gestured for him to take a seat outside. I'll just grab the coffee from inside. He stood by the door. I'll come with you. Sure, I said, trying to hide my unease. Inside the RV, I began preparing the coffee, all the while plotting my escape. If I could just get him to lower his guard. Mind if I use the restroom? He asked. Go ahead, I replied, pointing him in the right direction. As soon as he was out of sight, I grabbed my keys and quietly opened the driver's side door. Just as I was about to start the engine, he appeared in the doorway, eyes wild. Going somewhere? He snarled. I didn't answer. I turned the key and the engine roared to life. He lunged at me, but I hit the gas, causing him to stumble backward. The RV sped down the makeshift path, bouncing over rocks and roots. A loud bang echoed through the air. My side mirror shattered. He was shooting at me. This guy really doesn't want me to leave, I muttered. Spotting a narrow trail to the left, I took a chance. The RV barely fit between the trees, branches scraping against the sides like fingernails on a chalkboard. Finally, the dense forest began to thin. I burst onto a paved road. I didn't stop until I reached a ranger station several miles away. I stumbled inside, out of breath. There's a man out there. He attacked me, I managed to say. The rangers exchanged glances. Calm down and tell us what happened, one of them said. I recounted the events, and they listened intently. When I mentioned the cabin, one of the rangers frowned. There's no cabin out there, at least none that's supposed to be occupied. Another ranger chimed in. We've had reports of missing hikers in that area. They immediately dispatched a team to investigate. I insisted on going with them to point out the location. As we arrived, the cabin looked eerily quiet. The door was closed, no signs of life. The rangers approached cautiously, weapons drawn. They signaled for me to stay back. After a few tense minutes, they emerged. Place is empty, one of them said. But you need to see this. Inside, the cabin had been cleared out. No photos, no belongings, nothing. It was as if no one had ever lived there. He was here, I insisted. He had photos of me, of others. One of the rangers found a hidden trapdoor beneath a rug. Opening it revealed a cellar filled with personal items, backpacks, clothing, cameras, all belonging to different people. This doesn't look good, a ranger muttered. They continued to search and found a map marked with various locations around the park. These are campsites, I pointed out. He might be targeting more people. The rangers called for backup and began collecting evidence. As we exited the cabin, a chilling thought struck me. He knew you'd come, I said. That's why he left. Don't worry, a ranger assured me. We'll find him. Over the next few days, the park was closed as authorities conducted a thorough search. They discovered more hidden spots, a network of cabins and tunnels. It became clear that the man had been operating in the area for years, preying on unsuspecting campers and hikers. The news reported on the Glacier Park Predator, warning people to stay vigilant. They found several bodies in shallow graves, bringing a grim end to the search for some missing persons. I was asked to give a statement and help identify the items found. It was a sobering experience, realizing how close I came to becoming another statistic. One afternoon, as I was packing up to leave the area for good, a detective approached me. We found something you might want to see, he said. He handed me a photograph, a picture of the man, much younger, standing with a group of park rangers. His name is Thomas Hale, the detective explained. Former ranger who went off the grid after being suspected of misconduct. Why wasn't he caught before? I asked. He was clever, knew the land better than anyone, the detective replied. Used his knowledge to avoid capture. I nodded, absorbing the information. So what's next? We'll keep searching, but with the terrain and his skills, it won't be easy. I left Montana the next day, the events weighing heavily on my mind. As I crossed state lines, I couldn't help but think of the others who weren't as lucky. The experience had been harrowing, but I was grateful to have made it out alive. Several months later, I received a call from the detective. We got him, he said simply. That's a relief. I replied. "He was found trying to set up another cabin in a different park," the detective continued. "He's in custody now." "Good to hear," I said, feeling a sense of closure. The whole ordeal had been surreal here, like something out of a thriller novel. But it was real, and it was over. As for Thomas Hale, he was charged with multiple counts, and the evidence was overwhelming. The families of the victims finally got some answers, though it could never bring their loved ones back. I returned to my photography, choosing subjects a bit closer to civilization. After all, as much as I loved the solitude of nature, I figured there was something to be said for the safety of crowds. And maybe, just maybe, the best shots were the ones that didn't come with a side of danger. I remember it like it happened yesterday, even though it was a couple of years ago now. I had decided to take a break from the city and go camping in my RV. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision, but I had everything I needed. My name's Brian Gibson, and at that time, I was working a desk job that drained my soul bit by bit. The idea of spending a weekend in nature, away from emails and endless meetings, sounded like heaven. I chose a spot in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey, not too far from the town of Hamilton. It wasn't a popular camping spot, which suited me just fine. Less noise, fewer people. The first day was uneventful. I set up camp, cooked some burgers on the portable grill, and sat by the campfire, enjoying the quiet. As the sun set, the sounds of the forest took over. It was peaceful, exactly what I needed. The next day, I decided to explore the woods a bit. There was a small trail that led deeper into the forest, so I grabbed my backpack, a bottle of water, and set off. It was late afternoon by the time I realized I had wandered farther than I intended. The forest was dense, and the trail had become less clear. I turned around, hoping to retrace my steps, but everything looked different. It was as if the trees had shifted while I wasn't looking. I wasn't panicking yet. I had my phone with GPS, but as luck would have it, there was no signal. I walked for another hour, maybe two, until the light began to fade. Then I heard it, a scream, distant but unmistakable. It was a man's scream, full of terror. I froze, listening. The forest was silent again, but that scream had set my nerves on edge. I decided to head in the direction I thought the scream had come from, thinking someone might need help. As I walked, the trees seemed to close in around me. The forest felt oppressive, the air heavy. My mind was racing with possibilities. Maybe someone had an accident, or maybe it was just my imagination. Then I found it, a campsite, but it was a mess. The tent was torn, supplies scattered everywhere. It looked like a struggle had taken place. Blood spattered on the ground confirmed my worst fears. I called out, but there was no answer. There was no sign of whoever had been camping there. I found a wallet among the debris. The driver's license said Benny Caldwell. I didn't know what to do. It was getting dark, and I didn't want to be caught out in the open. I decided to head back to my RV and report this to the authorities. But finding my way back was another challenge. The forest seemed even more labyrinthine in the dark. After what felt like hours of stumbling through the woods, I saw a light in the distance. Relief washed over me as I realized it was my campfire. I practically ran the last stretch, feeling an irrational sense of safety once I was back in my RV. I locked the doors and tried to calm down. I thought about driving out of there immediately, but fatigue hit me like a truck. I decided to wait until morning. Sleep was elusive that night. Every rustle outside, every creak of the RV set my nerves on edge. At some point, I must have drifted off because I woke up to the sound of scratching. It was subtle at first, then more insistent. It was coming from the door. I grabbed a flashlight and my camping knife. Not much, but it made me feel a bit safer. I crept to the door and listened. The scratching stopped. Then there was a bang, and the whole RV shook. I fell back, dropping the flashlight. In the darkness, I could hear heavy breathing, something scraping against the metal of the RV. I scrambled to my feet and grabbed the flashlight, shining it toward the door. For a moment, everything was still. Then something hit the window. A face, pale and twisted, eyes reflecting the flashlight beam. I shouted, stumbling back, and the face disappeared. The next few hours were a blur of fear and adrenaline. The scratching and banging continued intermittently. I thought about calling for help, but my phone still had no signal. I was trapped. When the first light of dawn crept through the windows, the noises stopped. I waited a while longer before cautiously opening the door and stepping outside. The campsite was eerily quiet. There were scratch marks on the RV, deep grooves in the metal. I decided enough was enough. I packed up as quickly as I could and got ready to leave. As I was about to get in the driver's seat, I noticed something on the ground, a torn piece of cloth stained with blood. It wasn't there the night before. I drove straight to the nearest town and found the police station. I reported everything. Benny Caldwell, the screams, the attack on my RV. The officer took my statement, but seemed skeptical. He said they'd look into it, but mentioned that the Pine Barrens were full of wildlife and sometimes people imagine things in the dark. I left feeling frustrated and scared. I didn't sleep well for weeks after that. Every noise at night made me jump. I kept thinking about that face in the window, those eyes. I tried to move on, to forget about it, but it stayed with me. A few months later, I saw a news report about a missing person in the Pine Barrens. The name caught my eye, Benny Caldwell. They had found his body, or what was left of it, deep in the woods. The police called it a bear attack, but I knew. The report mentioned other disappearances over the years, hikers and campers who went into the Pine Barrens and never came out. I started researching, trying to find out more about what might be out there. There were stories, old legends about the Jersey Devil and other creatures, but nothing concrete, just a lot of speculation and fear. One night, I was at a bar talking to a local who had lived near the Pine Barrens his whole life. He told me a story about a creature, something the locals called the Creeper. He said it was an old legend, something parents used to scare their kids, but he looked serious when he told me that people had been disappearing in those woods for decades. The police never found anything, but the locals knew better. They stayed away from the deep woods, especially at night. I don't know if the Creeper is real or just a story, but I know what I saw, what I experienced. I haven't been back to the Pine Barrens since, and I don't plan to. Sometimes when I'm alone at night, I still hear that scratching sound, and I wonder if it's out there, looking for me. Life went on, and I tried to put the experience behind me. I moved to a different city, started a new job, and made new friends. But the fear never entirely left. I became more cautious, always looking over my shoulder, especially in unfamiliar places. Years later, I got a call from an old friend, Matt, who wanted to go camping. We chose a different location, far from the Pine Barrens in the Adirondacks. The first night was fine, just like old times, sitting by the fire, sharing stories. But on the second night, I woke up to a familiar sound, scratching. My heart raced as memories of the Pine Barrens flooded back. Some experiences leave a mark that never fully heals. The Creeper, or whatever it is, remains a mystery, a dark shadow in my past that I can't escape. So if you ever find yourself in the Pine Barrens or any deep, dark forest, be careful. Listen to the locals, heed their warnings. And if you hear scratching at your door in the middle of the night, don't open it. Some things are better left unseen. My name is Paul Miller, and back in 2007, I was camped out in my RV at Devil's River State Natural Area in Texas. The irony wasn't lost on me, camping at a place called Devil's River. But the spot had rave reviews from folks who swore it was the best place to get away from the world. At the time, getting away was exactly what I needed. Just me, my secondhand RV, and no one around to bother me. I'd come down after my business took a hit, figuring some solitude would straighten me out. Give me time to think, like people say. Now, if you've never been to Devil's River, picture this. Miles of desert scrub, dusty as you can imagine, with narrow paths winding through thorny mesquite and juniper trees. The river itself is cold and clear, carved through canyons with cliffs jutting up on either side, giving the area this closed-in, almost claustrophobic feel. You're out there and it feels like the rest of the world doesn't exist. So I'm about 3 days into my little retreat when things get strange. Now, I'm not one for superstitions or spooking myself, but the first night I heard some noises outside my RV. I chalked it up to animals. Coyotes or raccoons, maybe? There were these quiet, shuffling sounds like something dragging along the ground, but I ignored it, thinking it was probably just the wind. On the second night, I heard something again, only this time, it was closer. There was a light scraping against the side of the RV. It sounded almost deliberate, like someone running a stick along the metal siding. I grabbed a flashlight, flicked it on, and looked out the window. Nothing. Just the scrub bushes and the dark stretch of riverbank. But I could feel something out there, just beyond the reach of the light. I laughed it off, maybe a little too loudly, trying to convince myself that I was imagining things. But I knew something was off. Day 3, I decided to go for a hike down the river trail to shake off whatever jitters I'd picked up. I'm walking along, minding my own business, when I spot this old abandoned camp sucked back in the trees. There was a tent, half collapsed, with bits of clothing scattered around and a rusty bent knife lying in the dirt. Now, I'm no detective, but even I could tell something didn't sit right. It looked like whoever was here left in a real hurry. But that knife, that caught my attention. It wasn't just bent, it looked twisted, like someone had jammed it against something hard, something unyielding. Now, here's where things get serious. That night, after a long day of hiking, I'm sitting by my RV, grilling up some dinner. It was that perfect, eerie quiet that comes only when you're truly alone. And then I smelled it. A sharp, sour stench that hit me out of nowhere, like rotting meat mixed with damp soil. I glanced around, but there was nothing in sight, just the darkening desert. Figuring some animal had met an unfortunate end nearby, I shrugged it off. But when I stepped back inside the RV, that smell hit me full force. It was like it had seeped into the walls. I threw open the windows, thinking maybe it would clear out, but that only made it worse. And that's when I heard it. A faint, muffled groaning sound coming from right under my RV. I'll admit it, I froze. My heart was pounding, my hands slick on the flashlight as I bent down, shining the beam underneath. And there it was, a filthy, pale figure lying on the ground, half hidden in the shadows. His clothes were in tatters, and he was muttering to himself, something I couldn't quite make out. His face was a mess, crusted with dirt, and his hands were bloody, like he'd been dragging himself along the ground. I managed to get a grip and shouted, "Hey, what the hell are you doing here?" He looked up, his face blank, like he didn't even register I was there. Then he started laughing, a low, humorless laugh that sounded like it was scraping out of his throat. "You're next," he said, voice slurred like he was in a daze. "Next for what?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. But he just kept muttering to himself, a string of words that sounded like nonsense, broken up by bouts of laughter. At this point, I was ready to pack up and hightail it out of there, but he reached up, grabbing the side of the RV with one hand, and heaved himself to his feet. I took a step back, thinking I'd keep my distance, but he lunged forward faster than I expected. His other hand swung up, and I realized he was holding that twisted knife I'd seen earlier. It was like the air itself froze. He was muttering something about purging the filth, words that made my skin crawl. I was stuck, backed against the RV with nowhere to go as he came closer, his eyes unfocused but full of this sick determination. That's when I remembered the grill fork I'd left sitting on the picnic table. I grabbed it, clutching it like my life depended on it. And believe me, it did. He lunged again, slashing with that twisted knife, but I managed to dodge. The knife grazed past my arm. I jammed the grill fork forward, catching him in the side, and he let out a strangled grunt, staggering back. He looked down at the fork sticking out of him, his face twisting into this grotesque smile. "You're filth too," he rasped, pulling the fork out like it was nothing. Blood started pouring down his side, but he didn't seem to care. We were locked in this sick game of cat and mouse around the RV, me with my grill fork, him with that mangled knife. He came at me again, and this time I managed to knock the knife out of his hand, sending it skittering under the RV. He didn't even flinch, just lunged forward with both hands, trying to choke me. I was fighting for air, pushing against him with everything I had when I saw headlights. Another camper pulling in down the trail. In the split second he was distracted, I swung the grill fork as hard as I could, catching him across the face. He staggered back, stunned, and I took the chance to shove him off me and ran toward the other camper's headlights, yelling for help. The driver jumped out, seeing the blood on my arm and the crazed look in my eyes. I don't even remember what I said, but he called the cops immediately. They found the guy lying in a heap next to my RV, unconscious from blood loss. Turns out he was an escaped convict, a psycho with a history of violent attacks. The next morning, after the cops cleared out, I took a good look around that abandoned campsite again. Buried under some rocks near where I found the knife were bones, human bones, picked clean and brittle. They figured he'd been hiding out there for weeks, surviving on whatever he could catch, animal or otherwise. I left Devil's River that day, making one last stop at a diner to shake off the adrenaline. When the waitress asked where I'd come from, I just said, Devil's River. And she laughed, like I was telling a joke. Most people assume a job with the government is a safe gig, pension, health insurance, a sense of security. I thought the same until I got transferred to the Special Research and Containment Unit, SRCU. It's one of those divisions that doesn't officially exist. You know the type, where there's no nameplate on the door and your paycheck just says federal compensation. They brought me on because I was a damn good tracker. Years spent in the Army hunting down insurgents in the middle of nowhere, then a stint with Homeland Security tracking down unusual threats, the kind that most people don't even know are real. The SRCU was different from anything I'd ever been a part of. They called us hunters, but we weren't chasing anything normal. Cryptids, creatures, monsters, whatever you want to call them. The brass handed us dossiers with little more than grainy photos and secondhand accounts from the survivors, most of whom were half mad by the time we got to them. It's the kind of work that keeps you up at night, and it sure as hell isn't something you can talk about at a bar. I've always been a straightforward guy, follow orders, get the job done, and move on. But this job, it's the kind that sticks with you, no matter how many showers you take afterward. The last mission I went on was supposed to be routine. It wasn't. We were deployed to the forests of West Virginia near a small, unmarked town named Hollow Creek. The locals had been reporting strange disappearances, mostly drifters, people who wouldn't be missed, but then a couple of kids went missing, and that's when the feds got involved. By the time we were called in, the local police had already thrown in the towel. They chalked it up to wild animals, maybe a rogue bear. But our briefing made it clear this wasn't any bear. We were a team of 4, me, 2 other agents from the SRCU, and a local guide named Roy Caldwell. Roy was an older guy, leathery from years spent hunting in those woods. He wasn't one to scare easily, but even he seemed spooked by the reports. He didn't say much on the chopper ride out, just kept his eyes on the trees as we flew over the thick canopy. They call it the Hollow Man, Roy finally muttered as we landed, his voice barely audible over the rotor blades. They say it looks like a man, but it ain't. It's something else. The mission was simple: locate the creature, eliminate the threat, and bring back any evidence. We were armed to the teeth. Shotguns loaded with incendiary rounds, silver-tipped bullets, and a few experimental weapons the eggheads in the lab cooked up. But as we hiked deeper into the woods, I had the distinct feeling that none of it would matter. The forest was unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that presses in on you, makes your ears strain for any sound. The ground was soft underfoot, carpeted with fallen leaves that had gone uncrushed for what seemed like centuries. Every so often, we'd come across a patch of earth that had been torn up as if something massive had passed through. Roy would crouch down, examine the disturbed soil, and shake his head. "No tracks," he said each time. "No sign of what did this." Hours passed and the tension grew thicker. With each step, we found the first body, just after sunset. It was one of the missing kids, a teenager no more than 16. His body was draped over a low branch as if he'd been dropped from above. His limbs were twisted at odd angles, and his face was frozen in a look of pure terror. But what struck me most was the precision. There were no claw marks, no bites, just a single clean wound right at the base of his skull. "This isn't right," one of the agents muttered. "No animal does this." We pressed on, the darkness closing in around us. Our flashlights barely pierced the thick gloom, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to dance just out of reach. Then we found the second body. This time it was one of the drifters, a man in his 50s. He was sprawled out on the forest floor, his torso split open like a book. His organs were missing, completely gone, as if they'd been carefully removed. The scent of blood hung heavy in the air, metallic and nauseating. Roy crossed himself, muttering something under his breath. "We need to leave," he said, his voice trembling. "We ain't prepared for this." But it was too late. We were already being hunted. The first sign of it came as a low rustling in the trees. We all spun around, weapons raised, but there was nothing there, just the dark pressing in on us. Then came the sound, a wet tearing noise, like flesh being ripped apart. It was close, too close. I barely had time to react before something huge barreled into us, knocking two of the agents to the ground. It moved so fast that I only caught glimpses. A flash of pale skin, too pale to be human, and limbs that were long, too long, bending at unnatural angles. It was hunched over, its back arched, and as it slashed at the agent nearest to it, I saw its hands, long fingers tipped with something sharp. Not quite claws, but close enough. I fired off a round, the shot echoing through the trees. The creature recoiled, its body twisting away from the impact, but it didn't drop. Instead, it turned those impossible limbs toward me, its head tilted at an angle that should have been impossible. There was a face, or something resembling a face, but it was distorted, like someone had tried to stretch features over something that wasn't meant to wear them. It lunged again, moving faster than anything that size should. I managed to fire again, this time hitting it square in the chest. It stumbled, giving me just enough time to grab one of the experimental weapons, a sort of compact flamethrower we'd been issued for situations just like this. I didn't hesitate. I unleashed a torrent of fire at the creature. The flames licked across its skin, and for a moment I thought it might work. But then it screamed, a high-pitched, ear-splitting sound that sent us all to our knees. The creature flailed wildly, the fire catching on the nearby trees, turning the whole area into an inferno. But it didn't fall, it just kept moving, its body a blazing silhouette against the roaring flames. Roy was the first to break. He turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness. I don't blame him. Any sane man would have done the same. But there was no escaping that thing. It was faster than any of us, and within seconds, I heard Roy's screams cut off abruptly. The creature rounded on me, its flesh still burning but seemingly unaffected by the flames. I could see the raw, charred muscle beneath its skin, could smell the sickening scent of burning meat. It was almost on me when the second agent fired a shot, this one with a silver-tipped bullet. The creature paused, just for a split second, and that was all I needed. I pulled the trigger on the flamethrower again, this time aiming directly at its head. The flames engulfed it, and it staggered, emitting another ear-piercing shriek. But this time, it fell to the ground, writhing and convulsing. I didn't let up, not until it stopped moving altogether. The fire was spreading rapidly, consuming the forest around us. I grabbed the last remaining agent, and we hauled ass out of there, not stopping until we were clear of the blaze. When we finally reached the chopper, we were both covered in soot, our skins singed and blistered. The report was simple. Mission accomplished, threat neutralized. The creature's charred remains were recovered, just enough to confirm its existence. No one questioned our account. There were too many bodies, too much blood. The proof was undeniable. As the chopper lifted off, I looked back at the forest, now a smoldering ruin. Whatever that thing was, it was dead, and that was all that mattered. My name is Mary Bryant, and I was 28 when this happened. It was the summer of 2019, and I was in Greenbrier Valley, West Virginia, filming a documentary on Appalachian folklore. I thought I knew what I was getting into, some spooky local history, beautiful landscapes, and maybe a few nervous laughs with my friends. I was wrong. Dead wrong. It all started with Elliot, my best friend since college. Elliot's a big guy with a soft heart and an even softer spot for ghost stories. He's the one who got me into the supernatural in the first place, which is how we ended up planning this trip to the abandoned Greenbrier Ghost Tracks. He called it the perfect setting for my project. Elliot's girlfriend, Marcy, wasn't so enthusiastic. She's sarcastic to the bone and has a knack for poking holes in everyone's plans. Haunted train tracks? Really? She scoffed when we pitched it. What's next? A seance in the Walmart parking lot? Still, she came along, probably because she didn't trust us to survive a weekend in the woods without her. Dan and Ruby rounded out the group. Dan's the life of the party, always cracking jokes and pushing boundaries, while Ruby's quiet, but she notices everything. I've known her for years, and she has this sixth sense about people and places. It was Ruby who first warned us that something felt off. We got to the tracks late that afternoon. The forest was thick and green, the air heavy with humidity. The tracks were almost invisible beneath layers of moss and tangled weeds. If you didn't know what you were looking for, you'd miss them entirely. But the locals hadn't forgotten. They called them the Ghost Tracks because of the Iron Witch, a spirit said to haunt the area. Legend had it she'd been accused of witchcraft and hanged near the tracks in the 1800s. Before she died, she cursed the town, vowing to haunt anyone who trespassed on her land. The legend didn't scare me. It fascinated me. "We're filming history," I said, adjusting my camera as we set up camp. The clearing wasn't ideal. Dan's tent had a broken pole, and Marcy realized she'd forgotten extra flashlight batteries. But it would do. By the time we got a fire going, the sun was dipping below the trees, painting the sky a deep orange. The first sign of trouble came after dinner. We were sitting around the fire, laughing at one of Dan's ridiculous impressions when the forest went silent. Not gradually, like you'd expect when animals settle in for the night, but all at once, like someone had hit a switch. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just silence. Ruby was the first to speak. "Do you feel that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Feel what?" Dan grinned. "The sweet, sweet vibe of nature?" Ruby didn't laugh. "Something's wrong," she said. "We're not supposed to be here." Marcy rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on. It's just the woods at night. Stop trying to scare us." But I felt it too, that heavy, oppressive stillness. I tried to brush it off as nerves. I mean, I was the one who dragged us all out here, right? If anyone needed to stay rational, it was me. The second sign came a little after midnight. We were settling into our tents when we heard it. A low, rhythmic hum. Faint but distinct, like the sound of an old train engine in the distance. Dan poked his head out of his tent, grinning. "Is that your ghost train, Jess?" "Probably just the wind," I said, though my voice sounded thin even to me. "Yeah, right. When does wind go chugga-chugga-choo?" Marcy muttered. Ruby sat bolt upright, clutching her sleeping bag. "It's not wind," she whispered. "It's her." I don't know how long I lay there, staring at the tent ceiling, listening to that sound. It got louder and louder, like the train was barreling straight toward us. And then it stopped. Not faded. Stopped. I scrambled out of my tent, flashlight in hand, and found the others already outside. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the clearing. "What the hell was that?" Elliot asked, his voice shaking. "I don't know," I said. "But we should stay together." Ruby was the first to notice the scratches on the trees. They were deep, jagged marks, like something or someone had taken a blade to the bark. The scratches formed strange symbols, almost like runes. I filmed them, though my hands were trembling so badly the footage probably came out useless. "This is messed up," Marcy said, backing away. "We need to leave. Now." Dan laughed nervously. "What, and missed the big ghost reveal? Come on, Marcy, it's just some local pranksters messing with us." But Ruby shook her head. "No one's been here in years," she said. "This isn't a prank." The third sign came when Marcy disappeared. She'd stormed off after another argument with Elliot, saying she needed some space. We waited, calling her name, but she didn't come back. Finally, Elliot and I grabbed our flashlights and went looking for her, leaving Ruby and Dan by the fire. We found her an hour later, stumbling out of the trees. Her arms were scratched and bleeding, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. "Marcy, what happened?" I asked, rushing to her side. She looked at me, trembling. "I heard you," she said, "calling me. But it wasn't you. It wasn't you." Back at camp, things went from bad to worse. Dan tried to lighten the mood, cracking jokes about camping with Casper, but even he couldn't hide how scared he was. Ruby sat by the fire, staring into the flames, muttering something under her breath. "What's she doing?" I whispered to Elliot. "Praying, I think," he said. Her grandmother told her about this place, said it was cursed. The attack came just before dawn. We were packing up, ready to leave, when the forest exploded with noise. Branches snapping, leaves rustling, something heavy crashing through the underbrush. And then it hit Dan. I don't know how to describe it. One moment he was standing there, cracking a joke. The next he was flying backward, slamming into a tree with a sickening crack. He screamed, clutching his leg, which was bent at an unnatural angle. "Get him up!" I yelled. But the thing, whatever it was, wasn't done. It circled us, its shadow flickering in the firelight. I caught glimpses of it, long limbs, pale skin stretched tight over bones, and a face. God, that face. It wasn't human. Ruby saved us. She grabbed a knife from her bag, slicing her palm and letting her blood drip onto the ground. She chanted something in a language I didn't understand, her voice steady despite the chaos around us. The thing stopped, its head tilted, like it was listening. Then it vanished. We carried Dan out of the woods, Marcy supporting one side of him, Elliot and I taking the other. Ruby led the way, her bloody hand pressed to her chest. We didn't stop until we reached the road. Days later, I reviewed the footage. Most of it was unusable. Shaky shots, too dark to see anything. But there was one clip that made my blood run cold. It showed me standing by the fire, filming the group, and behind me in the shadows was the figure. It was watching us. I haven't been back to Greenbrier since. I don't think I ever will. But sometimes, late at night, I hear that hum again, the sound of a train that doesn't exist. And I wonder if the Iron Witch is still out there, waiting for her next trespassers. My name's Stephen Gibson, and this all happened back in 2021. I was out camping solo in my RV around a remote spot near Great Basin National Park in Nevada. Now, for anyone who's never been, it's pretty desolate, high desert, dry air, a whole lot of silence. I was drawn to that kind of solitude after a tough year. My wife and I had just split up, and I thought I could clear my head. Just me, my RV, and the stars. The RV site was mostly empty except for an older couple in an Airstream a few spots down. They seemed nice enough, waving when I pulled in but not striking up any kind of conversation, the kind of folks who valued quiet. I settled in for the night, made myself some instant noodles, and sat outside with a beer, staring up at a sky so clear I could see the Milky Way. It was supposed to be a break from everything. No stress, no drama. That first night was calm, exactly what I was hoping for. But by the next afternoon, I noticed something odd. A dusty, beaten-up truck parked about a quarter mile down from my RV. Now, people come and go in these remote spots, but usually they park closer to the actual camping grounds. This truck, though, was parked by some shrubs near the edge of a dried-up creek bed. I could see a guy moving around out there, a tall, lanky man, maybe in his 50s, wearing an old cap and a jacket that looked like it hadn't been washed in months. He had that kind of build that reminded you of a scarecrow, long and wiry, with clothes hanging off him. At first, I thought he was just another camper, maybe setting up a tent or something. But as the day went on, I noticed he hadn't moved from that spot. No tent, no firewood, nothing. Just him, sitting in his truck or standing around, looking in the direction of the RVs every once in a while. Around dusk, I went over to chat with the older couple, figuring they'd noticed the guy too. We made small talk for a bit, then I brought it up. Any idea who that guy is down by the creek? The husband, Jim, raised his eyebrows. Saw him earlier, figured he'd be gone by now. His wife, Linda, shook her head. Folks like that don't usually stay long. Too quiet out here. They like the bustle of towns, you know? We all laughed a bit, but something about it still bugged me. I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just passing through. That night, I locked up the RV tight and kept my phone within reach. By midnight, I was still lying awake, my eyes glued to the ceiling. A noise outside, a quick, heavy thump, pulled me upright. It was faint, but distinct. My first thought was that it might be an animal, maybe a coyote, since they wander around these parts. But it didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard, more like someone stepping around clumsily right outside. I lay there, trying not to breathe too loud, listening for anything else. Silence. After a few minutes, I told myself I was imagining things. But just as I started to drift off again, I heard another sound, a scrape, like something metal being dragged along the gravel. I peered through the small side window and saw a figure moving past. It was the guy from the truck, walking slowly around my RV. His head was down like he was looking for something. Then he stopped right near my driver's side door, reached into his jacket, and pulled out something long and sharp, maybe a crowbar. Hard to tell in the dark. My heart started pounding. This guy wasn't just lurking. He was up to something. I grabbed my phone and texted Jim, "Guy outside. Looks like trouble. Call cops if I don't answer in 10. Then I did the stupid thing. Classic horror movie stuff. I crept out of bed, tiptoed to the door, and peered through the small window by the handle. He was closer now, just inches from the door. I could see his face clearer in the moonlight, sunken cheeks, patchy stubble, and a grin that stretched a bit too wide. It was that grin that made my skin crawl. He looked like he was enjoying himself. A soft knock sounded on the door, 3 slow, deliberate taps. I swallowed, gripping the door handle without really thinking about it. His voice, low and gravelly, came through the thin metal. "Open up. Just want to talk." I'm not a fighter, never have been, but something about his tone made me angry more than scared. I knew he wanted to mess with me to see if he could make me open the door, but I kept my voice steady. "Get lost, man. I'm calling the cops." I thought that might scare him off, but he just chuckled, like I'd told a good joke. He rapped on the door again, a little harder. "Come on now. Ain't no one out here but you and me. Ain't nobody coming to help you." I could feel the tension in my grip, knuckles white against the handle. If I'd had a gun, I might have cracked the door open and pointed it at him. But all I had was a flashlight and a multi-tool, not exactly the kind of stuff to defend yourself with. I tried to text Jim again, but as I was typing, the guy must have heard me moving around because he pounded on the door, hard this time. "Open up, ain't got all night." Pathetic. My breath was coming fast, but I knew he could hear me inside. I had to do something, so I shouted as loud as I could, hoping it would wake up Jim or Linda. I said, "Get lost!" Silence. For a second, I thought he'd left, but then I heard his footsteps retreat a bit, like he was circling the RV. I ran to the other side, trying to keep track of him through the windows. He was moving back toward the front, right near the driver's side. Then, out of nowhere, he slammed something heavy against the windshield. A rock, maybe. The glass cracked, spider webbing right in the center. I felt a sickening jolt. This guy wasn't going away. He was trying to break in. I fumbled through the cabinets, looking for anything I could use as a weapon. My hands found a tire iron tucked in the back. Not much, but better than nothing. The pounding continued, and he was talking again, muttering to himself. Or to me, I couldn't tell. Snippets of what he was saying drifted in through the cracked window. "You think you can just park out here? Think nobody will see? No one notices, right?" It was like he was accusing me of something, like I'd done something wrong just by being there. Then a scream from outside. Linda. I scrambled to the door, threw it open, and sprinted to the Airstream, the tire iron in my hand. Jim was out there too, yelling at the guy to get back, but he was between them, blocking them from getting inside their RV. The guy turned, and for the first time I saw what he was holding. Not a crowbar, not a knife. Something else. Jagged, rusty, like an old railroad spike. He lunged. I swung the tire iron, clipping his shoulder. He barely flinched. The rest of that night was chaos. The cops showed up 20 minutes later. The guy was gone. A few days later, they found something else near the creek bed. Bones. Human bones, scattered, shallow enough to be uncovered by the wind. I still think about that grin and wonder if someone else parked out in the middle of nowhere has seen him too. I've always loved camping. There's something about the simplicity of being out in nature, away from the noise and clutter of the city. This story, though, isn't about the peace I found in the woods. It's about the time I went camping with my buddy Kenton and stumbled onto something that changed everything. We set off one Friday, our RV packed with supplies and our spirits high. Our destination was a secluded spot in the Appalachian, a place Kenton swore by. He said he found it a few years back and hadn't seen a soul there since. It sounded perfect to me. The drive was long but uneventful. We talked about the usual stuff, work, relationships, the latest movies. Kenton was in finance. He always had a knack for numbers. Me, I was more of a hands-on guy, working construction. It paid well and kept me fit, but it was the kind of job you didn't take home with you, which suited me just fine. We arrived just as the sun was setting, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink. The campsite was perfect, just like Kenton had promised. A small clearing surrounded by trees with a stream running nearby. We set up camp quickly, eager to relax after the drive. The first night was great. We cooked steaks over the fire, shared a few beers, and laughed about old times. It was like we were kids again, carefree and invincible. We turned in early, tired from the journey, and lulled to sleep by the sounds of the forest. The next morning, we woke up to the smell of bacon and coffee. Kenton was an early riser and had breakfast ready by the time I rolled out of bed. We planned to do some hiking, explore the area a bit. The air was crisp and fresh, the kind that clears your mind and makes you feel alive. We hiked for hours, following the stream deeper into the woods. The trail was overgrown, clearly not well traveled, which added to the sense of adventure. We didn't see any wildlife, just the usual birds and squirrels. It was peaceful. By the time we got back to camp, the sun was starting to set again. We were exhausted but happy. We made dinner and settled in for another night by the fire. That's when things started to get strange. It began with the noises. At first, it was just a rustling in the bushes. We brushed it off as a deer or some other animal. But then the noises got closer and more distinct. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling our camp. Kenton was the first to speak up. "You hear that?" he asked, his voice low and intense. "Yeah," I replied, trying to sound calm. "Probably just an animal." "Doesn't sound like any animal I know," he said, frowning. We both listened, the fire crackling, the only other sound the footsteps continuing, now moving around the perimeter of our camp. I grabbed a flashlight and shone it into the trees, but saw nothing. Kenton did the same on his side, still nothing. We decided to turn in, though neither of us was really convinced it was just an animal. We locked the RV, something we hadn't bothered with the night before. It was a restless night. Every little noise made me jump. The next morning, we found something that made my blood run cold. Around our camp, in the dirt, were footprints. Not animal tracks, but human, barefoot, large and spaced in a way that suggested whoever made them was tall. They circled our camp just like we had heard. "What the hell?" Kenton muttered, staring at the prints. "You think someone's messing with us?" I asked. "Maybe," he said, though I didn't believe it. We were miles from the nearest town, and the only road in was the one we came on. It didn't make sense. We spent the day close to camp, on edge and watchful. Nothing else happened, though, and by evening we were starting to relax again. Maybe it was a prank, some local kids messing with us. That night, we decided to keep watch in shifts. I took the first shift, sitting by the fire with a flashlight and a mug of coffee. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet. I watched the shadows, every rustle of leaves putting me on high alert. My shift passed without incident, and I woke Kenton for his turn. I fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the tension. It felt like only minutes had passed when I was jolted awake by a scream. I jumped up, disoriented, and saw Kenton standing by the fire, his pale and eyes wide with fear. "Kenton, what is it?" I shouted, grabbing the flashlight. "Over there," he whispered, pointing into the darkness. I followed his gaze and saw it. A figure just at the edge of the light, tall and thin with long, stringy hair. It was watching us, its eyes reflecting the firelight. For a moment we just stared at each other, frozen. Then it moved fast. It darted back into the trees, disappearing before I could react. I shone the flashlight around, but there was no sign of it. "Did you see that?" Kenton asked, his voice shaking. "Yeah," I replied, my heart pounding. "We need to get out of here." We quickly packed up what we could, deciding to leave the rest. The sense of urgency was overwhelming. We needed to get to safety. As we were finishing, we heard the footsteps again, this time more deliberate, closer. We scrambled into the RV and locked the doors. I started the engine, hands trembling, and we took off down the narrow dirt road. It was a rough ride, the RV bouncing over rocks and potholes, but we didn't care. We just wanted to put as much distance between us and that thing as possible. We drove for hours, not stopping until we reached a small town. We found a motel and checked in, both of us still shaken. In the safety of the motel room, we finally allowed ourselves to relax, though sleep was still hard to come by. The next day, we reported what happened to the local authorities. They listened, but it was clear they didn't believe us. Who could blame them? Our story sounded insane, even to us, but we knew what we had seen. We decided to cut our trip short and head home. Neither of us talked much on the drive back, lost in our own thoughts. The experience had left a mark, one that wouldn't fade easily. It was weeks before I could sleep through the night without waking up in a panic. Kenton and I drifted apart after that. We didn't talk about what happened. We didn't want to relive it. I buried myself in work, trying to forget, but it was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. A few months later, I got a call from Kenton's sister. He had gone back to that campsite alone. She hadn't heard from him in days. The authorities searched, but they never found him. Just his RV, parked in the same spot we had camped, and those same footprints circling the site. I don't know what that thing was, but it's still out there somewhere, and I can't shake the feeling that it's watching, waiting. If you ever find yourself in the Appalachian camping in a secluded spot, be careful. Sometimes it's not just nature that's out there. My name is Samuel Ford. I'm 35 years old, and I used to be a park ranger before I shifted to city planning. I've always been the type to keep a level head under pressure, but that weekend in Ocala National Forest changed the way I see the world and myself forever. It's hard to explain what we encountered without sounding insane, but I'll do my best. This happened in April 2012. My girlfriend Emma, two friends, Tyler and Kelly, and I decided to take an RV trip into the heart of Ocala. Emma, 30, has always been an avid nature enthusiast, and she had been itching to show us Alexander Springs, where the water is crystal clear and the trails promise adventure. Tyler, 28, my childhood friend, and Kelly, his girlfriend, were tagging along mostly because they loved camping, though Kelly was more into the safety of RV life than the rugged outdoors. Looking back, I wish I had trusted Kelly's unease from the start. We arrived at our campsite around mid-afternoon on a Friday, excited to leave behind the noise of the city. The RV, which I'd borrowed from my brother, was parked in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. The air smelled fresh, the kind of scent you can only get deep in the woods. We unpacked quickly, tents for Tyler and Kelly, while Emma and I would use the RV. "See? Perfect," Tyler said, slapping me on the back. "We needed this, man. Get the old crew together." Emma was already wandering the edge of the woods with her camera. "The biodiversity here is incredible," she called back, her voice tinged with excitement. "It's so quiet, though." It was quiet, eerily so. Usually you'd hear birds chirping, insects buzzing, something. Instead, the forest felt like it was holding its breath. I chalked it up to being farther out than usual. That first night was uneventful. We built a fire, roasted marshmallows, and told the same dumb stories Tyler and I had been recycling since we were teenagers. Kelly, however, seemed uncomfortable. She kept glancing over her shoulder and leaning closer to Tyler. "What's up?" I asked her. "Nothing," she muttered. It's so dark out here." "It's the woods," Kelheiler said with a grin. "It's supposed to be dark." We laughed it off and went to bed. I didn't know it then, but the forest had already started watching us. The next morning, Emma convinced us to hike a nearby trail. She was thrilled to explore, and I figured it'd be good to stretch our legs. Kelly was reluctant, but joined anyway. We hadn't gone far when Emma froze. She pointed at the ground, a single footprint, barefoot and large. But it wasn't just big. The toes were elongated, tipped with what looked like claw marks. "Bear," Tyler guessed. "No," Emma said, crouching. "Bears don't leave prints like this." Kelly took a step back. "Let's just go back. This feels wrong." "Relax," Tyler said, brushing it off. "It's probably some weird hiker. People are strange out here." Emma shot me a glance, her brows knitted. I nodded for her to keep walking. The hike became more unsettling the farther we went. The quieter the woods got, the more the occasional snapping of twigs sounded deliberate, like something was following us. Kelly kept muttering that she wanted to turn around, and even Tyler's usual cockiness began to falter. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. By the time we got back to camp, everyone was tense. We decided to stick close to the RV for the evening. As I gathered firewood near the edge of the clearing, I heard Emma calling my name. "Samuel!" It was distant, coming from deeper in the woods. I frowned. Emma had been by the fire a minute ago. "Samuel, come here!" The voice was louder now, insistent. My gut told me something was off, but curiosity won out. I stepped into the tree line. "Emma?" I called. The voice stopped. I turned back toward camp and nearly collided with Emma herself. "Where were you going?" she asked, breathless. "I heard you," I said, shaken. "You were calling me." Her face went pale. I didn't say anything. That night, things got worse. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of movement outside the RV, slow, deliberate footsteps crunching the pine needles. I nudged Emma awake and whispered for her to stay quiet. Peering through the curtain, I spotted a figure near the fire pit. It was humanoid, but wrong. Its limbs were too long, and its posture was bent, as though it had been broken and pieced back together. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out, heart hammering. "Who's there?" I barked. The figure turned to look at me, and I swear it smiled. Not a friendly smile, but a wide, unnatural grin that made my stomach churn. Before I could react, it darted into the woods with an animalistic speed, leaving no trace. The next morning, we found deep claw marks on the side of the RV and the smoldering remains of our firewood scattered around. Tyler laughed nervously. "Okay, so someone's messing with us." "Someone?" Emma shot back. "You think a person did that?" "It's probably a prank," Tyler insisted. "Locals messing with tourists." Kelly wasn't convinced. "This isn't normal, Tyler. That thing last night wasn't human." Emma spoke up. "There's a Navajo legend about skinwalkers, shapeshifters that take the form of animals or people to deceive you. They can mimic voices, even faces." "This isn't the Southwest," Tyler scoffed. "That's a desert legend." "Legends travel," Emma snapped, "and whatever it is, it's here." The argument spiraled until I stepped in. "Enough. We're leaving. Pack up, and let's go." As we scrambled to break camp, the forest closed in. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional crack of branches, far too close for comfort. Kelly stayed by the RV, clutching her arms as if shielding herself from something unseen. Then we heard it, Tyler's voice calling from the woods. "Guys, I found something. Come check it out." We froze. Tyler was right next to me, his face draining of color. "Stay here," I said, grabbing a flashlight and stepping into the trees. Tyler followed, despite my protests. The deeper we went, the darker it became. Then we saw it, a figure standing between the pines, its back to us. It looked just like Tyler. "Hey!" I shouted. The figure turned. its face a twisted, grotesque mockery of Tyler's features. Its eyes were too large, its mouth stretched too wide. Before we could react, it let out a guttural, inhuman screech and charged. We bolted back to camp, adrenaline pumping. "We're leaving now," I shouted. Everyone piled into the RV as I started the engine. The tires spun in the loose dirt before catching, and we sped down the forest road. But the thing didn't stop. It ran alongside us, its limbs moving in unnatural jerks. Its mouth formed words that weren't quite right. "Samuel," it mimicked, its voice distorted. "Don't leave." Emma screamed as it slammed against the side of the RV, claws screeching against the metal. Tyler grabbed a hatchet from the supplies and swung wildly at the window, shattering the glass and forcing the creature to fall back. We didn't stop until we reached a ranger station at the edge of the forest, shaking and covered in scratches from the shattered glass. The ranger took one look at us. "Around Alexander Springs?" he asked. We nodded. He sighed. "You're lucky you made it out." We never talked about that trip again. Tyler and I drifted apart after that, and Kelly refused to camp ever again. Emma became obsessed with the legends, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. As for me, I haven't set foot in the woods since. Some places are wild not because of the animals or terrain, but because something else lives there. Something that watches, waits, and hungers. I decided to take a trip to the Ozarks. I'd heard about the stunning views and serene lakes, and it sounded like the perfect escape from the grind. So I packed up my old RV and set off. My buddy Randy, who I'd known since college, decided to tag along. He's the kind of guy who can make you laugh even when you're knee-deep in trouble, so I figured he'd be good company. We drove for hours, the landscape changing from the flat plains of Oklahoma to the rolling hills of Arkansas. We finally found a secluded spot near a small lake. It was perfect, quiet, with a great view of the water. We set up camp, cracked open a couple of beers, and sat by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. It was late afternoon when we noticed the old man. He was wandering near the edge of our campsite, looking a bit lost. Randy waved him over. The old man introduced himself as Henry. He looked like he'd been through the ringer, clothes worn, eyes tired. He mentioned he lived alone in a cabin a few miles away and sometimes took walks to clear his mind. "Y'all be careful out here," Henry said, his voice low and serious. "There's things in these woods that don't take kindly to strangers." Randy and I exchanged glances. It sounded like something straight out of a horror movie, but we just laughed it off. After all, what's a camping trip without a little local folklore? That night, as we settled into the RV, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves outside. Randy was already snoring when I heard it. A distant scream, sharp and cut off abruptly. I sat up, my heart pounding, and listened. Silence. I shook it off, telling myself it was just an animal, and eventually drifted off to sleep. The next morning, we decided to hike to a nearby waterfall Henry had mentioned. It was a beautiful day, the sun filtering through the trees, the path winding through the dense forest. As we walked, Randy kept cracking jokes, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every so often, I'd glance over my shoulder, but there was nothing there. We reached the waterfall, and it was worth the hike. Crystal clear water cascaded over rocks, the mist cooling our faces. We spent a few hours there, just enjoying the peace. On the way back, though, things got weird. We found a clearing with what looked like an old campsite. It was abandoned, tents torn and scattered, and there were dark stains on the ground. Randy poked around, and we found a backpack with a wallet inside. The ID belonged to a guy named Tom Miller, and it looked like it had been there for a while. "This is creepy, man," Randy said, his usual humor gone. "Yeah, let's get out of here," I replied, a knot forming in my stomach. We hurried back to our campsite, and the whole way, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. That night, we locked the RV doors and kept the fire burning. We didn't talk much, both of us on edge. Around midnight, I heard something moving outside. I peeked out the window and saw a shadowy figure moving between the trees. It was tall and moved with an eerie, unnatural grace. I shook Randy awake and pointed. He grabbed a flashlight and shone it into the darkness. The figure disappeared. "We should leave," Randy whispered, fear in his voice. "Let's wait till morning," I said, not wanting to navigate the rough terrain in the dark. The night was restless. We took turns keeping watch, but nothing else happened. At first light, we packed up, ready to leave. As we were securing the last of our gear, we heard footsteps behind us. We turned to see Henry. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked, his face grim. "Saw what?" Randy replied, his voice shaky. "The creature. It's been around here for generations. No one knows what it is, but it's taken people. Good people," Henry said. "Why didn't you warn us?" I demanded, anger bubbling up. "Would you have believed me?" Henry shot back. "Just get out while you can." We didn't need any more convincing. We drove out of there as fast as the RV could handle, but as we rounded a bend, the RV sputtered and died. We were miles from the nearest town, no cell service, and it was getting dark. "Great, just great," Randy muttered. We grabbed our gear and started walking, hoping to find help. The forest was silent, too silent. No birds, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive, suffocating silence. After a while, we saw lights in the distance. It was a small cabin. Relieved, we hurried toward it and knocked on the door. A middle-aged woman answered, her face etched with worry. "Please, can you help us?" I asked. "Our RV broke down." She hesitated, but then nodded. "Come in. I'm Emma. You can use the phone." We stepped inside, grateful for the warmth. As we dialed for a tow truck, Emma watched us closely. "You shouldn't be out here," she said quietly. "People have gone missing." "Yeah, we've heard," Randy said. "What's going on?" Emma sighed. "It's hard to explain. There's something in these woods, something that hunts." We didn't sleep much that night, and Emma insisted we stay until morning. At dawn, we set out to find our RV. Emma gave us a shotgun, just in case. The walk back was tense, every snap of a twig making us jump. When we finally reached the RV, it looked undisturbed. Randy tried the ignition, and miraculously, it started. We drove out of there, not looking back. We made it to the nearest town and got the RV checked. Nothing was wrong with it. We decided to cut the trip short and head home. As we drove, we couldn't shake the feeling that we barely escaped something terrible. Randy and I didn't talk much, both lost in our thoughts. A few weeks later, I saw a news report about a missing hiker in the Ozarks. The name sounded familiar. Tom Miller. The same name on the ID we found. My blood ran cold. I did some research and found that people had been disappearing in those woods for decades. The locals had a name for the creature, the Wanderer. No one knew what it was, but the stories were all the same, something out there, something that watched and waited. I haven't been camping since. Randy and I don't talk about what happened, but sometimes I catch him looking over his shoulder, and I know he's thinking about it too. It's hard to explain, but that trip changed us. There's a part of those woods that never left me, a shadow that follows me in my dreams. They say time heals all wounds, but some things leave scars that never fade. The Wanderer is still out there, and I can only hope it never finds me again. My name is Jeremy Harris, and I'm 34 years old. This happened in November, deep in Chippewa National Forest, Minnesota. I was alone on what was supposed to be a week-long research trip for my job as a wildlife biologist. What I experienced out there is something I still can't explain. I'm sharing this because someone needs to hear it. Someone needs to know the truth about what's in those woods. I had driven my RV up to a remote site near Pimmy Lake, far from the usual tourist trails. The air was cool and crisp, the kind of weather that made me feel alive. I'd been studying declining wolf populations in the area and had planned to set up motion-triggered cameras along the trails. Wolves were elusive, but I'd always had patience. Alone time in the wilderness was something I craved, and it had never bothered me before. But from the moment I arrived, something felt wrong. The first night was uneventful, though colder than I expected. I woke in the middle of the night to silence, not the usual peaceful stillness of the woods, but an oppressive, unnatural silence, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I brushed it off. Maybe I was just jumpy from the long drive, but The feeling lingered. The second night, my RV's generator failed. I had plenty of fuel, but it simply wouldn't turn on. I fiddled with it for hours to no avail, eventually resorting to candles and my headlamp. The darkness outside pressed against the windows, thick and heavy. Around midnight, I heard it for the first time. A low growl, distant but distinct. It wasn't the howl of a wolf or the bark of a coyote. It was deeper, almost guttural. I grabbed my flashlight and peered out into the trees, but the beam barely penetrated the shadows. Nothing moved. Probably just a bear, I muttered to myself, though my voice sounded hollow in the quiet. The next morning, I found tracks near my campsite. They were massive, clawed prints sunk deep into the earth. At first, I thought they belonged to a bear, but the spacing was all wrong, too far apart, as if whatever made them walked on two legs. Later that day, I met Henry. I'd gone for a hike to clear my head and stumbled upon his RV, parked in a small clearing about a mile away. He was outside chopping wood, his grizzled face set in a permanent scowl. "Didn't think anyone else was camped this far out," I said, trying to sound casual. Henry looked up, his eyes sharp and wary. "Not many people. Too quiet out here for most folks." I laughed nervously. "That's why I like it." He set down his axe and wiped his hands on his pants. "You shouldn't be here," he said bluntly. I frowned. "Why not?" Henry glanced toward the trees, his expression darkening. "This forest. It's not right. People vanish out here, hear things they shouldn't. You'd do well to pack up and leave." I wanted to ask more, but his tone made it clear he wasn't interested in conversation. Still, his words stuck with me as I made my way back to my campsite. That night, things escalated. I woke to a strange sound, like someone whispering just outside the RV. My heart pounded as I strained to listen, but the whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by the same low growl I'd heard the night before. This time, it was closer, much closer. I grabbed the hunting knife I always kept by my bed and slowly opened the RV door. The forest was pitch black, the moon hidden behind thick clouds. My flashlight's beam flickered as I swept it across the campsite. That's when I saw them. Eyes. Dozens of them, glowing faintly in the darkness just beyond the tree line. They were too high off the ground to be wolves, and too far apart to be anything I could recognize. My breath caught, and I stumbled back inside, slamming the door shut. The next morning, I found Sasha. I'd driven into the forest farther than I should have, hoping to outrun whatever was happening. Instead, I came across her alone, sitting on a rock near a trailhead, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "Are you okay?" I asked, pulling over. Sasha looked up, her face pale and streaked with dirt. "I'm lost," she said, her voice shaking. "I've been walking for hours. I can't find the trail back." I offered her a ride, and she climbed into the passenger seat, clutching her pack like a lifeline. She seemed jittery, her eyes darting toward the trees as if she expected something to jump out at any moment. "What happened?" I asked as we drove. Sasha hesitated, then whispered, "I heard someone calling my name. I thought it was my brother, but he wasn't here. I kept hearing it, though, over and over." That night, the Wendigo came. Henry had warned me earlier that day when we ran into him again. "It's the hunger," he said, his voice low and grim. "That thing preys on the lonely, the lost. You hear it calling your name, you don't answer. You see it in the trees, you run." I didn't understand how literal his warning was until it was too late. Sasha and I had parked near a ranger station, hoping to find help in the morning. We were both exhausted, but neither of us could sleep. The air was bitterly cold, colder than it should have been for October. Frost coated the inside of the RV windows, and then the whispers started again. "Jeremy." My name, faint but insistent, came from the woods. "Don't listen," Sasha hissed, her eyes wide with fear. I nodded, gripping the knife tightly. The whispers grew louder, joined by the sound of branches snapping and leaves crunching. And then we saw it. The creature was emaciated, its limbs impossibly long, its pale skin stretched tight over its bones. Its face was a grotesque mask, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce straight through me. It stood at the edge of the clearing, its head tilting slowly as it watched us. "Run," I whispered, pushing Sasha toward the door. We bolted into the forest, the Wendigo's guttural growl echoing behind us. It moved unnaturally fast, its movements jerky and inhuman. Henry saved us, or tried to. He appeared out of nowhere, his rifle aimed squarely at the creature. "Go!" he shouted. "I'll hold it off." We didn't argue. Sasha and I ran, the sound of gunshots ringing out behind us, but the growls didn't stop. When we reached the RV, Henry was gone. There was no sign of him, no sound but the wind rustling through the trees. Sasha and I escaped the forest the next morning, driving straight to the nearest ranger station. The rangers didn't believe us, of course. They wrote it off as stress or exhaustion, saying Henry had likely been attacked by a bear. But I know the truth. Some nights, when the wind howls outside my window, I hear it again, my name whispered in the dark, and I know it's still out there, waiting for me to come back. Red River Gorge felt like the perfect escape, a few days surrounded by nature with no emails, no deadlines, just the wild and my camera. I needed this. Chris, my oldest friend, needed it too, though he wasn't much of a camper. I convinced him to come along, figuring the trip might rekindle our bond. We parked my RV at a quiet trailhead miles from the crowded campgrounds. As I unloaded my gear, Chris sat on a rock, fiddling with a bottle of water. "I still don't know why I agreed to this," he muttered, squinting at the dense forest. "It's like the trees are closing in." I laughed. "That's the point, Chris. We're off the grid. Fresh air, peace, maybe even some wildlife for me to photograph." "Yeah, great. Bears, wolves, that sounds peaceful." I ignored him, shouldering my pack. "Come on, it's a short hike. We'll camp near the river." Chris groaned but followed. The trail was narrow, lined with jagged cliffs and thick underbrush. The gorge lived up to its reputation, stunning, rugged, and untamed. But there was something else too. The air felt heavy. I brushed it off, chalking it up to the humidity. By the time we reached the riverbed, the sun was low on the horizon. I paused, staring. Something was wrong. The river was gone. Where there should have been rushing water, there was only cracked, dry earth. Chris stopped beside me, his expression shifting from annoyance to unease. Evan, are you sure this is the spot?" "Positive," I said, pulling out my map. "The river runs right through here." Chris crouched, touching the dry ground. "Looks like it hasn't been here in years." "That's impossible. It was flowing last week." My voice faltered. It didn't make sense. I felt a flicker of doubt, but quickly buried it. "It's probably seasonal," I lied, unwilling to admit how unsettling this was. "Let's set up camp." As night fell, the forest came alive, or rather, it didn't. Normally, the woods buzzed with life, insects, frogs, rustling leaves, but here the silence was oppressive. Even the wind seemed afraid to move. Chris sat close to the fire, nervously poking at the flames. "Does it feel quiet to you?" "It's remote," I said, fiddling with my camera. "Relax," he snorted. "Sure. Relax while nature murders me." "Chris, you're being—" I stopped. My camera had just powered down. Frowning, I turned it back on and reviewed the footage from earlier. That's when I saw it. A figure. It was blurry, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably humanoid. It stood at the edge of the frame, hidden among the trees. I blinked, rewound the clip, and zoomed in. The image distorted, the figure disappearing into static. "What's wrong?" Chris asked, noticing my expression. "Nothing," I said quickly, shutting the camera off. "Just a glitch." The first night passed without sleep. I heard it, the faint sound of footsteps circling our campsite, stopping just outside the firelight. Every time I shone my flashlight, there was nothing. Nothing. Chris didn't hear it. He was snoring in his tent, blissfully unaware. The next morning, we met Laura. She appeared suddenly, stepping out from the trees as we packed our gear. Her boots were worn, her hair tied back beneath a bandana. She looked like she belonged here, unlike Chris, who flinched at the sight of her. "Morning," she said, her tone friendly but guarded. "Didn't expect to see anyone this far out." "We're camping," I said, forcing a smile, "doing some photography." She nodded, her dark eyes scanning the dry riverbed. "Strange, isn't it? This river used to run year-round." "You've been here before?" Chris asked. "A few times," she said, "but I stay on the main trails now. This area is different. Different how? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. She hesitated. You've heard the stories, right? About the Wendigo? Chris groaned. Oh, great, a ghost story. That's what I need. It's not a ghost, Laura said sharply. It's a spirit, a creature. The Wendigo appears when something's wrong, when the land's been disrespected or people have gone too far. It preys on greed and hunger. I laughed, trying to ease the tension. Well, good thing we're not greedy. Laura didn't laugh. She looked at me, then at Chris. Be careful. Things can change quickly out here. Her warning lingered as we hiked deeper into the forest. Chris was unusually quiet, glancing over his shoulder every few minutes. I tried to shake off my unease, focusing on setting up new motion sensor cameras. But as I reviewed the footage, the images disturbed me. The cameras had captured blurry shapes, elongated, humanoid figures skirting the edges of the frame. I didn't tell Chris, he was already on edge. That night, the forest came alive with sounds, faint growls, snapping twigs, and something that sounded like breathing. I stayed by the fire, gripping my flashlight while Chris sat rigid beside me. I heard it, he whispered. Tell me you heard it. I heard it, I admitted. Stay close. At some point, Chris stood abruptly. I'm going to the RV. No way, I said. It's too far, but he was already walking into the darkness. I chased after him, my flashlight barely piercing the gloom. Chris, stop! He turned, his face pale. Didn't you hear her? Laura's voice. She's calling for help. I stared at him. Chris, Laura's not here. But he wasn't listening. He kept moving faster now until I grabbed his arm and yanked him back. Listen to me, I shouted. You're not thinking clearly. Chris looked at me confused, as if waking from a dream. I thought I heard. The growling returned, closer this time. The foul stench of decay filled the air, making my stomach churn. Something moved in the shadows, too fast to see. Run, I whispered. We sprinted back to camp, but the fire had died. The woods pressed in around us, suffocating and silent. Then came the mimicry. Chris, a voice called identical to mine. He froze, staring into the trees. Evan? What? It's not me, I hissed. Don't listen to it. The voice came again, closer. Chris, help me. Chris grabbed my arm, his face white with fear. What is that? The answer came with the snap of branches. A figure stepped into the clearing. A gaunt, elongated humanoid with glowing eyes and claws that gleamed in the faint moonlight. The smell of rot was overwhelming. It was the Wendigo. I shoved Chris toward the trail. Run! Don't stop! The Wendigo moved with unnatural speed, circling us. Its glowing eyes locked on Chris. It growled, a guttural, bone-chilling sound. Chris tripped, falling hard, and I turned back, swinging my flashlight wildly. The light caught the creature's face, twisted and skeletal, its lips curling back to reveal jagged teeth. It flinched, momentarily blinded, and I used the distraction to drag Chris to his feet. We stumbled through the forest, the Wendigo's footsteps echoing behind us. I didn't know where we were going. I just knew we had to keep moving. We found Laura at the edge of the forest. She had a torch in one hand and a look of grim determination on her face. It's here, isn't it? She said. I nodded, gasping for breath. What do we do? Fire, she said. It's the only thing that weakens it. Chris was shaking, his face pale. We're going to die out here. No, we're not, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. We fight. Laura handed me a torch, lighting it with hers. The Wendigo emerged moments later, its movements jerky and unnatural. It circled us, growling, its eyes gleaming with hunger. Hold your ground, Laura said. Don't let it separate us. The creature lunged. Faster than I could react, Laura swung her torch. The flames grazed its side and it screeched, recoiling. The sound was like nails on a chalkboard. Chris panicked, dropping his torch and bolting into the woods. Chris, no, I shouted, but it was too late. The Wendigo turned, chasing after him. Stay here, I told Laura, running after my friend. I found Chris slumped against a tree, his breathing shallow. The Wendigo stood over him, its claws poised. I didn't think. I just acted, swinging my torch with all my strength. The flames caught its arm and it howled, retreating into the shadows. Chris looked up at me, his eyes glassy. Evan, he whispered. It's inside my head. I can't stop it. You're fine, I said, pulling him to his feet. "We're getting out of here." We made it back to Laura, but Chris wasn't the same. He muttered incoherently, his eyes darting around like he was seeing things I couldn't. "We have to go," Laura said. "Now." The three of us ran, the Wendigo's growls following us all the way to the RV. When we finally reached it, I shoved Chris inside and slammed the door. Laura and I collapsed, exhausted, but something felt wrong. Chris was silent, sitting in the corner, his head bowed. I approached cautiously. "Chris," I said. He looked up, smiling, a cold, unnatural smile. "You can't escape," he said, his voice distorted. The Wendigo's reflection gleamed in his eyes. We drove away, leaving the gorge behind, but the claw marks on the RV side were a stark reminder of what we'd faced. Chris didn't speak again. His smile was frozen, his eyes distant. As we crossed the state line, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The Wendigo stood at the edge of the forest, watching us. We survived, but I'll never go back. Some places aren't meant to be disturbed. My name is Amanda Hughes, and I'm 35 years old. This happened last summer during what I thought would be just another adventure to fuel my travel blog. I've spent the better part of my career exploring hidden gems and offbeat places, but nothing, not even the ghost tours in Savannah or the creepy hotels in New Orleans, could have prepared me for Enchanted Rock. I pulled my RV into the campsite just before noon. Enchanted Rock rose in the distance, a massive pink granite dome that glowed faintly under the Texas sun. I'd been here once as a kid, but I couldn't remember much beyond the climb and my mom yelling at me to stay close. This time I was alone, and I planned to capture every bit of its beauty. After parking in a secluded spot, I grabbed my camera and gear, excited to scout the area. The plan was simple: hike to the summit, take some photos, and interview a few locals about the legends. The place had plenty of them, and ancient curses, ghostly sightings, and strange disappearances. Perfect fodder for a post that would rake in clicks. I checked in at the visitor center where I met Maggie, a park ranger who looked to be in her late 50s. She wore a wide-brimmed hat and had a weathered face that reminded me of an old cowboy movie. "First time here?" she asked, her tone friendly but measured. "First time as an adult," I said, smiling. "I'm a travel writer, and I wanted to cover some of the stories about the rock, the spooky stuff." Her expression shifted slightly. "It's a beautiful place, but you need to respect it, especially after dark." "Why? Is it really haunted?" I teased. She hesitated before answering. "There are things here older than you can imagine. The Tonkawa people believe this was a sacred site. They say a warrior cursed it before he died. Instead, I've seen enough strange things to believe there's truth to it." I laughed nervously. "Well, I'm not planning to anger any spirits." Her gaze lingered on me, her eyes serious. "Just don't wander too far off. And if you hear drumming, go the other way." I dismissed her warning as local folklore meant to entertain tourists, but as I hiked up the trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that the rock was watching me. The path twisted through clusters of boulders and dry scrub, just the air hot and still. Occasionally I'd hear a bird or the rustle of a lizard darting through the brush, but otherwise it was unnervingly quiet. About halfway up, I noticed something strange, symbols etched into the granite. They were rough and jagged, like they'd been scratched in haste, and they didn't look like anything I'd seen before. I snapped a few photos, thinking they'd make for a good mystery in my blog. Then, for no reason I could explain, a chill ran down my spine. It was the middle of the day, blazing hot, but the air felt cold and heavy. I brushed it off as nerves and kept climbing. When I reached the summit, the view was breathtaking. The horizon stretched endlessly, the land below dotted with patches of green and the occasional shimmer of water. I set up my tripod and began taking pictures, losing myself in the work. That's when I heard it, a faint drumming sound carried on the wind. I froze, my heart thudding in my chest. It wasn't loud, just a low, steady rhythm, but it seemed to come from all around me. "Maggie was just trying to spook you," I muttered, shaking my head. But the sound didn't stop. If anything, it got louder, more insistent. I packed up quickly and started back down the trail, my nerves on edge. The shadows seemed darker now, the shapes of the rocks more menacing. I told myself I was imagining things, that there was a rational explanation for the sound. Maybe someone was drumming at the base of the rock. But deep down, I knew better. That night, I stayed in my RV, editing the photos I'd taken. They were stunning, capturing the eerie beauty of the landscape perfectly. But when I scrolled through the shots of the summit, I stopped cold. In one of the pictures taken at the edge of the overlook, there was a figure. It was faint, barely visible, but unmistakably there. A tall, shadowy shape that hadn't been there when I snapped the shot. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. Was it a trick of the light, a glitch in the camera? I tried to rationalize it, but the memory of that drumming filled my mind, and suddenly I didn't feel so alone. The first knock came around midnight, soft, tentative, like someone tapping on the side of the RV. My blood turned to ice. I froze, listening. It came again, louder this time, followed by a scraping sound, like nails dragging across metal. Grabbing a flashlight, I moved to the window and peered outside. The campsite was empty, nothing but shadows and the faint outline of the trees. Then I saw it, etched into the side of the RV, that same symbol I'd seen on the rock earlier that day. My hands trembled as I stepped back, my mind racing. Someone was messing with me. They had to be. But deep down, I knew this wasn't a prank. The next morning, I drove to town and asked around about the symbols. Most people didn't recognize them, but an older man at a coffee shop told me they looked like warnings used by the Tonkawa. They marked sacred places, he said, places where the spirits were restless. The word restless stuck with me. On a whim, I stopped by the visitor center and found Maggie. When I told her what had happened, she frowned deeply. "You need to leave," she said, her voice firm. "The rock isn't just a place, it's alive, and you've drawn its attention." "Attention?" I repeated, my stomach sinking. "You've disturbed something that doesn't want to be disturbed." I didn't leave. I should have, but my curiosity and my pride kept me there. That night, the drumming returned, louder and closer than before. The air inside the RV felt suffocating, thick with an invisible weight. I tried to sleep, but kept waking to strange noises, footsteps circling the RV, faint whispers just outside the door. Around 3 a.m., I couldn't take it anymore. Grabbing my flashlight, I stepped outside, determined to confront whatever or whoever was tormenting me. The campsite was shrouded in darkness, the trees casting long, jagged shadows as I shone the light around. At the edge of the clearing, I spotted something, an altar of stones arranged in a circle. In the center lay a bundle of feathers and bones, tied with twine. My breath caught. The drumming grew louder, echoing in my ears. And then I saw him, the shadowy figure from my photo. He stood just beyond the altar, his form shifting and flickering like smoke. "You're not real," I whispered, backing away. "This isn't real." But then he moved, stepping closer. His eyes burned with an unnatural light, and the air grew colder with each step. I stumbled, falling to the ground, and the flashlight rolled out of my hand. "Leave," a voice hissed, deep and guttural, reverberating through the clearing. Scrambling to my feet, I ran back to the RV, slamming the door behind me. The drumming stopped, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. At dawn, I packed up and left without looking back. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the figure standing on the summit, watching me. I've written about many places since then, but I'll never return to Enchanted Rock. Some things are meant to remain untouched, their stories told in whispers and warnings. And if you ever visit, take Maggie's advice. If you hear drumming, go the other way.